So I watched the first episode of Tower of God, and there were some parts where I thought it was kind of weird, and I thought, oh man, and it's probably just weird because it's the first episode. First episodes are weird sometimes because, a series hasn't figured out what they want to do yet. But then I looked into it and I found out, oh man, it wasn't weird because it was the first episode. It was weird because they skipped stuff. So hey everyone, I've got a giant list of changes. We're going to go through them, and hopefully by the end of this video, you'll know some of the stuff that Webtoon readers knew for the corresponding material. This is a video about trivia and nitpicks, so let's just get into it. The first section I want to go through is what hardcore Tower of God fans were saying about the first episode, because they had some opinion about the differences that they were able to spot. The biggest differences I saw people talking about were the pacing. The anime covers the first 6 episodes of the webtoon. That's quite a lot of material. And from what I saw, readers agreed that it was very fast. Whether or not that was good or bad depended on who was writing the comment. People were wondering about the first scene of the anime where the hand grabbed Bam into the tower. That wasn't something that occurred in the webtoon. Another big one, there was an omitted scene that explained why Yuri was there and how exactly she knew when to step on Bam. Speaking of Yuri, another big difference that readers pointed out was that Yuri was a bit more aggressive in the anime. As a new watcher, I found her to be aggressively curious as opposed to the playfully curious Yuri that's in the webtoon. Next up, a more particular difference, the anime changed the jargon of irregular to non-regular. It was actually really funny how many more people were talking about that one. These people were excusing a lot of other changes, but the one that they would not give up was irregular. Really interesting fandom. Another big difference that was talked about was the removal of nuance to Head-On's character. And finally, another big one that was popping up was a change to Black March's classification. Apparently, it's not supposed to be a sword. So before we start listing out all the changes I can, here's some notes about the changes overall. The anime happened from Bam's perspective. That's why a lot of Yuri's scenes were removed. Also, we missed some of Bam's internal thoughts. On that note, we also had a lot of repeating information omitted. Readers also said that some of the omitted info was going to be re-explained later. So if I gloss over something as we go into the actual proper differences, it's because it's info that we're probably going to get later, and I do want to respect the idea that the anime wanted to keep some spoilers hidden. And then finally, I want to let you know, I started strong when I was compiling the differences for this video, but as the webtoon episodes went on and on, more and more differences were starting to come up and I just couldn't keep up anymore. So just keep in mind, for this video, I'm not going to be covering any stylistic differences. I'm not going to be covering any art differences. The art in the anime is supreme compared to the art in the webtoon. And I'm not going to be covering any differences that have to do with Bam not getting his internal monologues. Anyway, let's get into it. So as I mentioned earlier, the webtoon doesn't show the whole hand grabbing scene from the anime. Bam just wakes up in the tower after a cut to black. Maybe this hand shows up later in a flashback, but from what the readers are saying, it doesn't seem like it will. All I can say is I was really confused when the princess was talking about Bam opening the doors on his own, because a giant hand grabbing you doesn't scream opening doors by herself. Head-On being heard before the gates open also doesn't sound like Bam opened the doors by himself. I think this is just an issue of stylistic changes causing a little bit of a wrinkle. The next changes continue with the scene where Head-On comes in. First, Bam has a hatchet. Second, the second line that Head-On says to Bam is a line acknowledging that Bam opened the door himself. The reason I point that one out is because it makes it seem like Head-On isn't too aware of Bam, which leads to the next change. Head-On asks for Bam's name, to which Bam says the 25th Bam, and we have a nice translation note telling us that Bam means night, so the 25th night essentially. This change leads us to the same conclusion of Head-On knowing Rachel, but the webtoon's Head-On seems sneakier than anime Head-On. Next, we lost information about the White Eel's temperament. That was unfortunate. Along with that, we lost lines where Head-On was taunting Bam with the possibility of danger that Rachel could be facing. We missed out on this more sadistic Head-On. Oh, also, Bam ran in there with his hatchet. Next up is the entirety of the Yuri introduction scene, where we see her giving a lot of exposition about what she's doing. Here's the notable stuff. The scene played up Yuri's playful curiosity. We saw a depiction of the stairs heading down the first floor. We had this giant hole Yuri was looking down at Bam from. We had Evan and Yuri teasing some power mechanics such as metamorphosis and cross-species hybridism or hybrid. We had a comment that Bam is just an ordinary human. We had Yuri's misunderstandings of irregulars, and we also got some tease to the names of other irregulars. We got characterization of Head-On, specifically that he did not like irregulars, which is something you don't really feel in the anime. And finally, we had Yuri jumping out to help Bam Bam because she thought it was fun when he started running towards the eel. I do want to point out though that a lot of the info that popped up in this scene was adapted into the anime in different spots. For instance, Evan talking about Bam's capabilities originally happened in private between he and Yuri. Next is the scene that really shows the difference in Yuri. In the webtoon, her first words to Bam are a sigh of relief, a greeting, before asking if he has a death wish, as opposed to her just berating him from the very start. It's small changes like this that fans are looking at when they say Yuri feels different. Next up, another omission that harms Head-On. Head-On was supposed to give Bam his pocket. This built off of the Head-On disliking Irregular's characterization. We also lost some trivia about Head-On being the oldest guardian when Yuri called him out. Next scene was the pocket scene. This was one of the ones that confused me in my initial watch. What happened was that Evan didn't have any more pockets but an A grade one. That's why Bam ended up with a good one. It was by the character's own volition. This gives another scene to compare the Yuris in. Here's anime Yuri. Here's webtoon Yuri. One is nicer than the other. Next, I want to point you to this spot. This is the line that muddles up a viewer's read on Yuri. In the context of her watching from above, there's no need for her to iterate this line. The line implies that there was still some doubt as to whether or not Bam was an irregular, and is in contrast to a Yuri that specifically came because she knew 100% that an irregular showed up. The point of this point is that this line creates a different impression of Yuri's information collecting capabilities, but this line had to occur because we needed to get the exposition to understand what was going on in the scene. Next, before Evan told Bam about the invisible function, we had this blurb where he tells us some jargon about ranks and whatnot. The next big change is actually something the anime added. The webtoon acknowledged that Yuri was a princess, but the anime is the one that went that extra mile to explain the things about the king and why he shouldn't know and what was happening and Head-On's place in relation to the king. So very interesting that they chose to add in all those world building details. Next change, the anime omitted a minor detail when they were talking about irregulars. We were told that the tower brings in chosen people. It kind of adds a different impression to who exactly gets to go into the tower. At this point, there was also stigma around irregulars brought up. Next up, this scene didn't happen. All I want to say is that I'm happy that the anime added it in, as opposed to this scene of Yuri messing with Head-On. The next added scene is Yuri's whole thing about being the Princess of Jihad. Really seems like the anime wanted to drive that point home, but it was a scene that I found awkward in my first watch through. I was glad to see that with regards to the webtoon, it is legitimately out of place. Next up, when Yuri was going to lend Bam Black March, Head-On was taunting Yuri while Yuri was also cursing Head-On. There was a lot more going underneath the surface here. Next is this whole bit about Black March. So it's a needle, the greatest of needles even, used to stab and pierce. Very cool. Now we know why he didn't slash the ball. And then we have this important word apparently, ignite. Oh, and we also have the creator's name, Ashil Edwaru. There was lots of info, man. All you need to know is that longtime readers brought up an issue about them not referring to Black March as a needle. Moving on, the next change is a perplexing change. Here's what Yuri says in the anime. Here's the webtoons version. When asked if irregulars will change the tower, she says she doesn't have times for idle fancies, and follows up with she's taken a liking to Bam. Okay, so I'm pretty sure these are opposite thoughts. Idle fancies are things you do when you have nothing to do. So in other words, they're things you do to pass the time when you're bored. So webtoon Yuri is not looking for a time killer. Webtoon Yuri is motivated by interest in Bam. I just find it interesting how the meaning is changed across the two mediums. And this continues the thought that Webtoon Yuri is just nicer. The next change is a change in build-up. The anime skipped Evan hyping up how hard of a test it was going to be for Bam in the webtoon, also skipping how much detail he went into about how Bam was going to fail, before then explaining all that detail out loud. Next up, the anime deserves some credit. They nixed a whole bit where Bam was talking about how Rachel was his light. What they gave us instead was a scene where you quite literally understand that Rachel was his light just by the visuals. This was a good example of an image being worth 1,000 words. Good job, anime. Also, the light stuff makes a lot more sense when you realize that there shouldn't be any light in an underground world that Rachel said she was living in. So quite literally, she was his light. That's artistic, man. At least that's how I read it. Next detail, Bam used his hatchet on the ball. The hatchet broke, but it was a good effort. Okay, the next change is about Black March. In the anime, Evan refers to a tower superstition. In the webtoon, Evan talks about how Yuri said that Black March was a tomboy who was hard to talk to. In other words, Evan figured from Yuri's own experiences that Black March would get along better with guys. Also, they were throwing around the ignite keyword the whole time. Readers said that the ignite keyword is actually really important. Just keep that in mind. Another detail Evan saw something in Bam, something that attracts people. He's kind of like the Luffy of Tower of God. Next, the anime omitted a bit of characterization for Black March and Rachel. Black March talked a little bit more, and Bam revealed that Rachel was someone not as marvelous as Jules, nor the most beautiful girl in the world, but she was the most precious person in his life, even if she was a tomboy that makes jokes, and even if she was someone that lies to him at times. It was honestly a really heartfelt moment and a heartfelt plea. And I also found it funny how both Rachel and Black March are blonde tomboys. So, maybe Bam attracts a certain type, but it's kind of unfortunate that the anime nixed that. That was a really somber, cute moment. Next up, we lost another characterization moment with Head-On, where Yuri questions Head-On's motives. One last note, the anime did something clever with an omission. I don't want to spoil it because it was a really good way of maintaining the same conclusion, but showing the road to that conclusion differently. All I will say is that the secret is in this shot on the screen. It was a really tricky move, anime, but respect because you still maintain the meaning of the scene. Next, we have another Yuri and Evan solo scene where they question whether or not Bam will do well in the tower. This scene also gave us exposition on the floor that Bam went to and revealed Evan's height is due to his race. It also mused a little bit on how these two characters feel about the tower. Next, in the anime, we got the rainbow sequence with Black March that doesn't happen in the corresponding Webtoon episode. So it definitely makes me feel a little bit more curious about Black March and Rachel. And at this point, we're now approaching the end of the episode where Bam was on the other level. So things here got ridiculous in how many differences were occurring, such that I'm pretty sure that a lot of these things that were skipped in for that portion of the episode will be revealed in episode 2. So I'll leave that comparison for the episode 2 comparison video. One thing I do want to say, however, is the scene where the guy stood on Bam made no sense. I mean, he had a clear shot to stab the guy from below. It would have worked. Thankfully, the Webtoon makes much more sense. It had Bam running away from the guy with his agility, so that's more reasonable. Again, if you were stuck underneath someone's foot, why would you not stab them with the sword that's in your hand, right? It was just the awkwardness from the anime changing stuff up. Okay. I'm being mean. Bam was probably just scared, but I can tell ya, I have a much better impression of the Bam that could run the enemy with his defining feature, agility, quite literally the only feature Evan appraised, than I do of Bam that asked the sword to do something and didn't try to use the sword for what it's meant for. But again, that's just adaptational weirdness. Anyway, in closing, what I want you to know is that we're really splitting hairs here, guys. But that's because sometimes there's an effect from the changes. For quite a few differences, the meanings of the conclusions were still maintained more or less, but there were a few spots where something was lost. For instance, in the episode, you get a sense that Yuri has taken a liking to Bam, but you lose how much that influences her decisions. So in terms of the broad strokes conclusions we can draw from the episode downplayed anything having to do with races because by the end, the episode showed that there were multiple races in the world. We had characters who give slightly different impressions because of skipped or altered dialogue, specifically Yuri and Head-On. We saw that the anime was brilliant when it came to conveying what Rachel meant to Bam with little words. And we saw that the anime chose to prioritize Yuri's position while sacrificing other world building details. All in all, I think the biggest victim is probably the world building, and that's an area I'm going to keep an eye on. I feel like that's something that Webtoon readers will talk about more often in the future. And it'll be interesting to see what else the anime chooses to sacrifice from here on out. Anyway, that's it for me. Everyone, thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought down below. Let me know what you think about Yuri's character. Let me know if you think she's been changed a lot. Let me know how you felt about that weird Yuri just comes out of nowhere stepping on Bam's face scene. I'd really like to know that. Anyway, everyone, thanks for watching. Stay healthy, stay safe, continue watching anime, enjoy your anime, and hope you have an absolutely great day.